week off last week, apologies, but I've got another amazing interview for you this week. It's with a good friend of mine who's also an incredible bass player and absolute top bloke, Mr. Fatty Hargreaves. Chris is an absolutely amazing player, as well as being just the loveliest guy on the planet with the most epic beard, the originator of the beard, I should say. And Chris plays with a real variety of artists, but one of the things that Chris does exceptionally well is he uses a load of effects pedals to get some incredible sounds and really interesting sounds and different sounds on the different gigs that he does. So hopefully this will be really interesting for those of you who love pedals and love synth sounds, bass music and the likes. So enjoy. Once again, please subscribe to my YouTube channel. Please follow me on Instagram and give Chris a follow too as well. I'll put all of his details at the end of the video. Cheers. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Fatty Hargreaves. Everyone calls me Fatty, and I play bass. Is this going to be a fun interview?
Yeah, I think it's going to be great.
I play bass for lots of different people, which is fun. Like a nice variety. Alex Clare and Andrea Triana, Jay Gray. So I've got my own band called Submotion Orchestra, and I've got another one called PENGSHUi, which is quite new. It's like a kind of punk band, but fronted by a grime MC. So that's like a bit of a crossover thing. And then I work with maybe like a lot of reggae people. I do like David Rodigan's orchestra, which means I get to play with a lot of like reggae legends, which is quite cool. His shows are kind of like an orchestra that plays kind of classic tunes, but he actually gets the artists over basically. So we do quite a bit with that. That Outlook Orchestra actually plays with quite a lot of different kind of guest artists, which is fun. Dep on quite a lot of soul gigs as well. Variety is the spice of life. When I was younger, I started out, when I was up north, there's such a gigging scene up north for like doing like the circuit, say, Pontins, you know, working men's clubs, Butlin, like that kind of scene. So from early doors, I'd be doing, say, like that kind of gig alongside, like playing in big bands. Well, I suppose big bands are big all over the country, but up north there seemed to be quite a lot of them, and that's where you'd kind of cut it in terms of like reading. There'd be a lot of sight reading. The band leader would be like calling out numbers. You'd be shuffling through a pad trying to find it, and then you'd be in, which would be really good fun. And then up north was a great sort of scene. There's a lot of great players, so it was good growing up there and stuff. Liverpool was obviously amazing for like going over there, playing. Leeds was insane, so I went to uni there. And the good thing with Leeds was there was so many different genres, but each genre was played really well, if that makes sense. So like Omar Puente was teaching at Leeds. So when you went to go and see him, you know, like, or a Cuban gig, it'd be like the real deal, you know what I mean? And then Haggis Horns and New Master Sounds were there. So when you saw a funk gig, that was the real deal. You know, like when you saw different sort of pockets, there was a good like DIY punk and rock scene there. And that was really good. And then a lot of electronic music and dub and dubstep coming out of Leeds. Well, it was started off a lot in Croydon, but then also like sub-dub and all the Iration steppers lot were playing it all up there and stuff, which was good. So I kept going to those places to listen to a lot of reggae and dub and dubstep, which was fun. I started out on classical guitar, and then from classical I went to high school, and they said, oh, there's no tuba players at the moment. So they said, here's a bass guitar. Because I'd done a lot of my grades, so I knew how to read music. And they were like, well, here's a bass guitar. We've got no tuba players. So I basically had to sit in the orchestra and play all the tuba parts on bass guitar. So that was quite fun. That was like year 7, just like got given a bright red Squire P bass. And then luckily, Mr. Dawson, he was called, he was like, over the summer holidays, he was like, just take it away with you. I remember that first summer, I had like a Sound City 30 watt bass combo, Squire P bass, bright red, amazing, and just shedded it the whole summer. And then came back and I'd like nailed all the tuba parts. Never played tuba, just had to play all the do, do, do. And all the ledger lines, there were like 10 ledger lines below bass clef as well. So I had this ability to be able to read insanely low. But in my head, I was basically just chopping it up the octave. I'd like shedded it over the summer so that I could sight read tuba parts, which were like written out an octave lower than what I was playing it at. Like I said, with all the scene up north, there was like a Saturday morning music school. So I basically, there was like a jazz band there. So I basically joined the jazz band, and then that moved on to like county orchestra sort of things. So I joined the county orchestra jazz band. But I think I joined it all quite early, maybe when I was like 13, 14. So the average age of the players were like 16, 17 or so. So it was quite good for me, like getting in the mix. I had to like learn a lot of stuff very quickly, which was quite cool. There was a load of good like big band. That was the county orchestra big band. And then I joined Northern Jazz Orchestra, which was a good one because that was all Maynard Ferguson charts. So for big band, but it was all electric bass parts, and the parts were amazing, and you could really go to town on it all, which was really fun. Most of the players in the county orchestra and in Northern were studying at Leeds, so I'd go and visit them and then hang out with them quite a bit. So it's kind of a natural thing. I think a lot of players from around that neck of the woods ended up going to Leeds. Yeah, that was it really. It was kind of like, it all kind of made sense, you know, that whole kind of transition, playing in all the big bands, and then most of the players that you'd be playing with were all brass players or whatever, them all studied jazz at Leeds. And there was a wicked scene up there. I had a funk band in Blackpool that I set up, and one of the guys that was in the band, he was a scratch DJ, and he used to do turntablism within the funk band, which was quite cool. And then he ended up going to Leeds on the production course. And because I knew him really well, on the open days, when they basically just stuck you all in a room and they were like, right, just find who you're going to live with. And then basically I ended up living with loads of producers, which is how I got into like electronic music and hip hop, was because I was studying the jazz, but when I was coming home I was recording with them and learning about what they were learning on the production course, which was really cool. Obviously I had to shed all my modes and all that sort of stuff, but on the other side I was playing in hip hop bands and listening to loads of hip hop and watching people produce music, and because there's that whole side to it, which was quite interesting. Yeah, stayed there for ages actually, like 8 years. And then there was quite a few, like I set up quite a few original projects. And then there was one that was kind of a collaborative thing with a few guys that ended up turning into Submotion Orchestra. And that kind of took off a little bit in Leeds, and then did quite well actually. That all came out of, it was all the jazz players, but that were also interested in like electronic music and bass music, that would all go to this rave Subdub that I was chatting about. It was that whole kind of scene, because it was such a big part of Leeds, that style of music. And also it was when it was first taken off, so there's a real like genuine excitement about that kind of type of music at the time. It was amazing to see it kind of take off a little bit. And I think Leeds was a real big, like one of the biggest festivals, Outlook Festival, which is the bass music festival, all kind of spawned out of Leeds. There was a couple of guys that ran nights around there that put on the first ever one, and that kind of like spearheaded that movement, which was quite good. And Submotion Orchestra was part of that scene, so we just kind of grew with that really. It was quite exciting. Early influences were probably like listening to a lot of like soul and hip hop. So I'd listen to a lot of like all the Pino's bass lines, like on the D'Angelo album, and listening to, who's on the Jill Scott stuff? Is it Ty Tribbett? I remember just like learning those albums. So like a lot of like hip hop and soul stuff and how they moved around the beat. So they were big influences at the start, how you kind of play different lines. It was just a different way of playing from the jazz thing, where I was just reading, and then that whole side of like playing displaced sort of things, playing wonky, playing really behind the beat, you know. And then once you get into that hip hop thing, you then explore, I found it quite interesting to learn bass lines that were like programmed and weird, which was quite exciting, you know, because I lived with those producers. They'd be like, oh, here's a beat I made. And like maybe like harmonically it was terrible, it didn't make any sense, and you know, but and it didn't sit well, not that it didn't sit right, it was like chopped in a weird way. I was like, yeah, but that really works. So it was like getting my head into, how will you play in that sort of style, i.e. like all wonky and weird, which was quite interesting. The synth stuff that I got into was actually Pete Watson gave me a copy of Trilogy, which was a synth bass program. I don't know did you ever use it?
I had a quick go, yeah.
Yeah, it was wicked. I learned all that, and then when Submotion started, I had like a Moog Rogue that I was playing. So I was playing synth on synths and taking maybe elements of what I'd learned and listened to all the hip hop and soul stuff and playing it on synths. And then basically the turning point was when I was like, right, I want to take these synths but translate it to pedals so I can play it, so it'd be a bit more organic, or maybe not organic, but just like a different take on it, because it would sound different if it was from playing with bass. So I basically started experimenting with synth pedals. And then the more I got into that, the more I started listening to electronic music and how those bass lines were made, because the bass lines aren't necessarily that complicated notes-wise and playing, but the complicated aspects of it comes from the automation and the sounds and how, because obviously on Logic or whatever they were produced, they were manipulating and automating filters or adding LFOs, and I was like, and how, there was different layers of bass and different sounds throughout maybe one single line, and I was like, right, I'm just going to incorporate that onto a pedal board. It was quite exciting really, because once I'd found the right pedals to use, I was basically, say like how I'd sit down and learn a record, I was reverse engineering, if you think of it that way, all the electronic stuff, i.e. how was that bass made? It's just this single note, but then the cut-off opens at the last part, comes off there, then there's an LFO that jumps in there, then the sub drops out but comes back in for the last part. So that was your 4-bar phrase, do you know what I mean? Instead of, it's just these notes, you were thinking about it in a different way. It would be like, it's this part, and then I'd then use the pedals and assign foot switches or pedals to manipulate the sounds that I was making. Just like you'd learn a palette of sounds or scales or phrases on a bass, I was then also doing that in kind of a production way and going, I can create a bass line but using these sets of things instead. Because musically, electronic music isn't, it's more how the song builds and the automation rather than playing a million notes or whatever. So the interest comes in all the other bits that you can add to it, all the sounds and stuff. Because the theory of it is like it's like production sort of theory, So you're basically like serving the song rather than trying to add in loads of stuff. So it's like playing exactly what the song needs. And a lot of the time for the bass, it is just planting it down and just dropping in and out. And when you do get into production or writing music, it does make you have a different take on your own bass playing, because you're thinking more about the overall song. So I think I've calmed down probably on playing more. No, I've been playing less, maybe, hopefully, don't know, not sure. But that theory, in that sort of way, I think, it definitely makes you think about the song more, rather than, I've just learnt this sick riff, I've got to stick it in after every 8 bars. Do you know what I mean? That happens, that's fine. I'd use like Fender stuff. I've got a nice P bass there. I've got quite a few jazz basses and stuff. I like the feel of those basses. They're just like super simple. There's a reason, isn't there, why they're still like the #1 bass, basically. So they're amazing. And then the gear, I've gone through a lot of different pedals, but what I've found that works the best is all the Line 6 stuff. So I started out using one of those M9 pedals. That was like a starting point. And then I've basically added different sections to it. Added like a lot of Boss pedals, a lot of Moog pedals. You can get the Moog Fugas, the individual ones. So I was adding those. As I was learning, I think I basically expanded to this like heinous, stupid rig of loads of pedals, which was great and it could do everything that I wanted to do. And then when I started touring a lot in terms of like flying, that's when it got problematic, was because so many individual pedals and it being flown about everywhere, just it was a nightmare for stuff breaking, basically. So so what I've been doing then is getting it smaller and back to smaller stuff. And then luckily, as I've been doing that line 6 because I basically all the line 6 stuff, you could definitely get better individual pedals to get the sounds, but the good thing is with line 6 is that you can automate any part of any effect within some of the big units, basically. So you probably have to go into it a little bit more and are tweaking stuff, but the usability of it's insane. So now I've got like the Helix, which is like the new line 6 model, which fits in a backpack, so it goes on a plane. And then you can split the signal 4 ways within the unit. So for a lot of the bass music gigs, I've got like a separate sub running, stereo synth mids, and then another channel 3 for like, I can basically send delays to a separate channel as well. So, and then you've got 2 expression pedals, so 3 in total so one would be like, say, opening a cut off, the next one would be like an LFO, and the other one would be, say, sending a particular signal through some delays or reverb. You know, it's like a volume pedal. You can send it and then take it off, sort of thing. So you can delay particular lines that you're playing. And then the strip at the front, you can turn certain sounds off and on as well. So the options are amazing with all that. Feels good to play. Needs a decent, strong signal. So the P basses are good because they're like pretty rocky, just like solid signal. And then Overwater built me a bass with, basically, they did something in the electronics. They basically like lowered the impedance and boosted the gain within the electronics, which basically meant like every single note is like super strong. When you play that bass through the pedals, it's noticeably like every note's just like, boom, there you go. Because I think every note that you're playing, the only downside of that is it has, as a bass itself, a little less character because it's very like, down the line, this is the note that I'm playing. Whereas, you know, some of the old Fenders, like there's a bit of a difference, isn't there, when you're playing? Maybe it is like dead notes or whatever, or some bits, yeah, just had maybe a bit more character. But the Overwater thing, for playing, I use that on a lot of the Outlook Orchestra stuff, because when we do all the dubstep, we just did a show with Mahler playing all these dubstep stuff, and everything needed to be super militant. It was all time coded to like visuals, so it was like no messing basically, and everything needed to be absolutely on point. So I used it for that, which sounded wicked. Say like the punk stuff, I use the P bass because even though it is triggering synths, there's a lot of normal sounding bass within the layers of it. And then the P bass sounds amazing for that sort of stuff. We did Lollapalooza with Alex Clare, one of the biggest gigs he's ever done. We played just before Queens of the Stone Age, like insane sort of gig. And we flew in the day before, and I had a funny feeling about my pedals. I was like, I'm sure something, I don't know, you know when you just know that something's gone wrong or whatever. I said to the tour manager, because the gear went straight to the festival, I was like, can I go and check my gear just because it's a big gig? And he was like, it'll be fine. I was like, no, I really want it. Can I just go to site to go and check it? It was such a weird thing because when I opened it up, basically, I think when they checked all my equipment, they basically didn't put it back in properly, and they ripped all the pedals off the board. It was an absolute mess. And at that time, I was using like an M9 and an M13, and both of them went down. They just weren't working. It was weird. I plugged it all in, nothing was working. And this lovely girl who was working the stage, she just finished, and I said, I need to get to a guitar shop. And bless her, she basically drove me around Chicago and had to basically buy a new M13, M9. And even half an hour before going on stage, I was on the riser behind the back of the stage, still programming, and it was the most stressful thing ever. I think that was probably the point where I came back. I was like, right, I need to scale it all and make it more user-friendly, because I'm so reliant on those sounds for the gigs that I do, that actually that's more important than the bass. So now my basses go under and my pedal board is in a backpack with me at all times, sort of thing. Because I could go anywhere, and as long as there is a decent bass, I could still do a gig. My gigs that I'm doing, the pedal board is like the kind of holy grail. I need to do more practice. I kind of notice it sometimes because I've got more into sounds and I'm doing a lot more writing. That's definitely taking a dip, which I feel bad for. But I get excited maybe about different things now, which is cool. You know, learning more about sounds and production, and then also starting my own band, the PENGSHUi stuff. I've realised that there's so many extra things you need to do just to set up a new project. It's a nightmare. Doing your own thing is exciting, but also a massive pain in the ass. It's just like relentless. So playing the bass has taken a bit of a dip, but I probably need to build that back in a little bit more. I notice it when I do, say, if I do like a corporate gig or, you know, something like that, I'm still playing the same sort of things, you know, that I was playing years ago. So I should probably find some more licks. Not use my same 5 licks. They're good 5 licks though. PENGSHUi is, just because it is just bass, drums and vocals, everything is very much around the riffs and building. But I write a lot of those with a guy called Pete Cannon, who was one of the producers that I live with in Leeds, which is really nice that me and him are still working together. Those are written very much with the bass in mind, in terms of, because I'd be playing everything live. There'll be extra drum parts that we have on SPD, and maybe like a counter melody synth that's been written, which is on SPD as well. But everything is bass, so that's all centered around that. Clare was my first delve into writing pop songs, which was really exciting. So actually, that was the complete opposite then. It was more like chords and middle eights and intro, and then, you know, creating songs. So actually, by the time I got my bass lines down, I felt like a session bass player to myself, because I was just like, oh, they're the songs, and I just need to play what's right for those songs. But a few of them were quite bass heavy. And then Submotion is quite collaborative actually. So it will be a mixture of things. It might turn out that a song that we've been jamming would then turn into a song or whatever. But they're bass heavy, but not bass led Submotion. So it's very prominent in the mix because it is in that realm of dubstep. The sub's really heavy, and I've probably got a nice line there'll be automation within it, but it won't have been written around the bass. It usually starts off with a nice set of chords, and then it's like, right, how can then me and drums will then be like, right, how can we pull it into adding something interesting? Like if it's at 140, how are we going to make a nice kind of interesting pattern that like sits with the kick and the bass, and how's it all going to work? So that kind of feeds into the song. Yeah, I maybe have, but I think it's just been quite organic. I just love playing hip hop, and like oh, sorry, I'm awake. I just love all that music, really. I haven't decided to carve out a niche. I think I just love playing that music, and I've learned how to play that music. So I've just taken a different side of it, basically. I went to all the raves, so I liked that music, you know. So I was like, right, how will I do that in terms of playing bass and sort of, you know, that's just my angle, really. Hasn't been like convoluted or anything. But there's the great guys that are using effects in interesting ways as well. John Davis is amazing. He plays with Jojo Mayer. He's got his own kind of way of, he's using like analog synths and then triggering them with his bass as well. He's amazing. There's definitely a little crew of people using like mad effects. There's so much good technology out there nowadays. I think everyone's doing different things and getting more into sonic sounds. I remember when we started out, like everyone wanted to do all the gospel chop stuff, didn't they? And just like chopping around and sort of thing. And I feel like, so particularly in like pop gigs now or the kind of session scene or whatever. People are more serving the songs a little bit more. Do you know what I mean? And there'll still be obviously tasty bits in, but I think a lot of people are getting into sounds and production and how to do that sort of thing and bring that into a live sphere, because the technology is getting better, which is good. So you can go to some gigs now and there's some really interesting stuff going on. I think it's good. I'll just give you one of my pedal boards, tell you what to do. I've got a good mate of mine, Tom Varell's done a couple of Submotion gigs recently, which has been wicked. And it's cool actually, because I basically had to teach him how to do all the foot pedal stuff. And actually he's a guitarist, and he's an amazing bass player as well, but primarily a guitarist, but he knows about pedals, because it's more like, once it's done and programmed, it's more about logistics of like, that on here, that on there, slowly open the cut off, LFO goes on the fourth bar, take it off, next. Part B section is that part on that synth there, goes to that bit, blah, blah. It's all stuff like that. Like I said, more like technical stuff, whereas you're probably just playing G for the whole thing, but there'll be like 10 things going on down there. It's all about in the prep of it all, basically, about how it's routed, how stuff is automated and assigning pedals. I think it's just gathering as many different things as possible. Do you know what I mean? Like, learn the scales, learn, all the theory is amazing. That's one side of it. Another side of it is don't be late. Make sure you're wearing the right stuff. Do you know what I mean? All that's like another pocket of it, isn't it? And then it's like collecting these things to like make sure you've got certain things down. And one of them is, I think it would be, is getting Logic, Ableton, whatever, and learning about that sort of thing and dissecting tunes sonically to figure out what sort of sounds, and learn about EQ, learn about compression, and all these sorts of things. It's just another thing to add to your thing, like a palette of things to draw upon. So if you say in a session, someone's like, oh, can you do that sound from whatever? You'd be like, oh yeah, I've got it because it's this, and this is how it was EQ'd, and it's separated, and that's got a bit of this on, blah, blah, blah. It's just like another thing you can draw upon. Me and Mike started the beard. Mike was before me, wasn't he, maybe? Mike Halls. I mean, his beard's definitely better than mine. But yes, I think I grew the beard just before it started to get popular. Maybe I don't know. Maybe I jumped on the bandwagon, but it stayed. That's the most important thing. So,
Is that where the groove's kept?
Probably, yeah, along with parts of my lunch and dinner at different times of the day. Gross. I have a lot of PENGSHUi stuff, which is the new band. We're doing our first ever headline tour, which is exciting, and basically building up to the album getting released, which is coming out end of January. So it's just super relentless, because I do all the really annoying social media things that you have to do nowadays, which is basically generating content. It's fun on one side, isn't it? Because nowadays, obviously, you have to do that side. So that's what everyone consumes, but it's like it can get pretty stressful. So I'm basically going to be doing a lot of that, building up to an album release. And then I've got a tour with a new singer called Jay Gray, who's great actually. She's kind of soul singer, the same kind of, there's a nice emergence of good soul singers coming out of the UK at the moment. But yeah, mainly pushing on with my original thing, which is exciting. Submo started writing again. I had a session the other day, which is cool. So hopefully that'll come out, because we did our last album maybe 2 years ago, or coming up to 2 years ago, and we had a tour around that, so that's been quite quiet. Alex Clare's got bits in, but PENGSHUi stuff is actually fully clashing with his stuff, so I've decked that out, and then I really want to try and push the new band, basically, which is my main focus at the moment. On the last Submotion gig, Taz's keyboards are so mashed because he doesn't look after it. He got them on stage and they were all out of tune because he used analog stuff, and he thought I detuned it. So what he did was, before he went on stage, mashed all my tuning, tuned all my strings up, basically. But what that did is, when I was like, when I went on stage, I did a quick tune, luckily, and I was like, I looked over at him and he looked at me as if like, I've got your back. And I was like, why have you done that? Because I haven't did that to your keyboards. Anyway, because the strings were so tight, halfway through the gig, 2 of them just went. I had to do the whole gig on 2 strings. It's like, Taz, you're in big trouble. And he was like, that got you back for DJing. I was like, I didn't even touch your synth. Silly little sausage. Unbelievable.